Hi there, and welcome to episode 4 of the Educator's Corner podcast. In this solo episode, I thought I'd offer you a summary of what I've been learning since the first podcast at the start of this term back in September. And I thought I might do this in a practical way by sharing our AI strategy and how it's panning out at British School Muscat very briefly. And I think as we are all juggling so many different demands on our time and our energy, it is really helpful to just have a simple and clear strategy that maps out a way forward for ourselves and for our community. I first want to start off by acknowledging that I do believe that regulation of this technology at the nation-state level is necessary, but I'm not sure it's going to be enough. And secondly, what's also very clear is that the moment we start talking about AI and how we might use it safely in our classrooms, in our schools, in our communities, that we'd start asking big questions about the design of our current education system, whether we're talking about curriculum or assessment or how changes in both these might impact pedagogy. So there are, many of us, I think, believe issues around education design that we do need to get into. And I think those are best tackled working with our wonderful membership organisations like BSME and COBIS and FOBASIA in the international sector, for example. And we can channel our views and ideas into and through those organisations because they have access to the governments and the bigger organisations, and they can represent our views at that macro level. And then where does that leave us in schools? What can we do sort of a year on since certainly ChatGPT arrived on the scene and started empowering us to do things even better, and also started empowering certainly some of our learners. And now, for example, I've got colleagues saying to me, I've ChatGPT'd that document, Kai, or I've ChatGPT'd that letter. Do you want to have a look at it? We wouldn't have used that language 12 months ago, so things are definitely changing. So what's our strategy at British School Muscat? It's not necessarily the right way or the only way, but I thought I'd share it just to put it out there to provoke some thoughts and feedback, and maybe you can share what you're doing in your school. So term 1, we're just coming towards the end of that here. The focus very much has been on playing and learning. And I'm very grateful to colleagues like Dan Fitzpatrick, who was the guest on the second podcast, and Ethan Mollock and Darren Coxon and others who have been pioneering the way forward into this new landscape of AI and education. So play and learn. And that, even though that was the focus for term 1, that's going to continue into the foreseeable future. So what's the strategy for term 2? Well, we're going to carry on playing and learning. And then inspired by Kat Place, who was the guest for the first podcast back in September, Kat talked about and shared a survey of technology use that she'd used with her primary school students in Newport back in May and June. And we've shared a template of that survey with the first podcast, and we've taken that template and adapted it. And so we're going to start term 2 by doing an audit of technology and AI use of our students and also of our staff. And we're going to use that data from those surveys, from that audit, to then stimulate conversations, first with colleagues, then with students, and then with parents. And that's the focus for term 2. So continue to play and learn, do the audit, and then have those discussions. And then term 3, we are then going to start, if we haven't done already, and we've done a little bit of work on this, we're going to be moving into the sort of policy and practice territory documentation. And in the third podcast, we had a great conversation with Philippa Wraithmel, where she was telling us what she'd been learning around moving maybe from acceptable IT user agreements to responsible IT user agreements. And maybe that just subtle shift in framing from acceptable to responsible, that can sort of refresh the way that we look at those agreements and how we reshape those for both students and for colleagues, and also in light of AI being in the world now as well. And we're also going to be looking at our policies. So do we simply adapt some of our existing policies to embrace developments in AI, or do we have one single policy, or maybe a mixture of both? And I'm very grateful once again to Conrad Hughes of International School Geneva for sharing their AI policy at the end of September, and also Mark Anderson, otherwise known as the ICT evangelist. He's also shared a template of what an AI policy might look like. So that's our plan for the rest of this year. Continue to play and learn. Term 2, we're going to be auditing and discussing with various groups, and then term 3, we're going to move into policy formulation. So by the start of the school year 2024-25, we have got some policies in place. That's at least the plan for now. So please, by all means, offer your feedback, suggestions, advice on that strategy. And if you've got a strategy you'd like to share, please put it in the LinkedIn comments. Finally, I have a question for you. Have you read The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman? Well, if the answer to that question is no, and you're interested in AI and the impact it's having not just on education but the wider world, I would suggest that something you check out over the next few weeks, few months, in terms of your reading list. I thought it was a compelling book. I was, for example, intrigued to learn about the concepts of pessimism, aversion, and the precautionary principle, and why Mustafa Suleyman thinks that containment of AI must be possible. So I think it's balanced, I think it's superbly written, I think it's fascinating, and it also has a 10-point plan at the end, which is very constructive. So that's my sort of reading tip for the moment. You also might like to listen to Mustafa Suleyman in conversation with Stephen Bartlett on Diary of a CEO, discussing key points from the book. So if you've got any feedback once you've read that, or if you've already read it, please share it with us. And please offer your thoughts, suggestions, practical tips on how we start to tackle the 21st century's greatest challenge in our schools and the wider education sector. Have a restful break, take care, and stay curious. You've been listening to the Educator's Corner podcast, the show that brings you conversations with educators from all over the world, the podcast where we stay curious for just a little bit longer. The Educator's Corner podcast is hosted by me, Kai Vasher, and produced by Stuart Pardoe, Zoe Snell, and Marion James, and by BSM BSS Productions.